Hey everyone, this is Miss Strat. We're going to be talking about the GI system. I don't look for this to be an hour and a half because I'm going to give you the most important aspects. I do want you to make sure that you print off and have in front of you your study guide. For this med surge GI system, because everything on that study guide is on the exam. Okay, and so when I mention it, you need to highlight it, you need to take notes on it, and make sure that you review that. Okay, just some heads up. Prayer for the students: to be a nurse is to walk with God along with the path that our Master trod, to soothe the aching of human pain, to faithfully serve for little gain, to lovingly do the kindly deed, a cup of water to one in need, a tender hand on a fevered brow, a word of cheer to those living now, to reach the souls through its body's woe. Oh, this is the way that Jesus would go. Oh, white-capped nurses with hearts so true, our great physician is working through you. Amen. So there's your objectives. This is just a description of the human digestive system. We're going to be talking about, all these organs. Not that you have to know everything, but this is a review of A&P. So you want, the primary function of the GI tract is digestion and distribution of food. Okay. There's upper GI tract, the small intestine, the lower GI tract. You might want to just jot down that website. It's just a digestum from the mouth to the anus. I think you saw it in bowel elimination, which was kind of fun to watch. So what goes in must come out, for sure. And your A&P, or your main organs, is what we're going to be discussing. Got to get caught up here. So digestion begins in the mouth. You know that. It starts as the food is being chewed and swallowed. Okay, we're going to talk about each one of these organs simultaneously. So your mouth is in the oral cavity. And there's a hard palate, which is at the top, soft palate's at the posterior portion of the mouth. It's usually mostly muscle and that uvula. The uvula and the soft palate at the bottom deter food and liquid from entering the nasal cavity, which is above the mouth. So food enters the GI system through the mouth, where it's chewed and swallowed. You want to make sure that you know the wave-like contraction that propels the food through the digestive system, and it's peristalsis. You knew that from bowel elimination. So the stomach temporarily holds ingested food and prepares it to pass in the semi-liquid form to the small intestine. The cardiac sphincter is the opening between the esophagus and the stomach. You need to know, because the study guide says you have to know basic anatomy. The cardiac sphincter is the opening between the esophagus and the stomach. The opening between the stomach and the duodenum is the pyloric sphincter. You need to know these sphincters, where they're located. When contracted, they keep the stomach contents enclosed, and when relaxed, the stomach contents flows into the duodenum. But the small intestine's primary function is just absorbing nutrients. There's three portions: the duodenum, some people call it duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. Your large intestine receives waste from the small intestine. It propels waste toward the anus, opening from the body for elimination. There's a cecum-like structure, a pouch-like structure at the beginning of the large intestine. You need to know where the cecum is. Okay? The appendix is a narrow tube at the tip of the cecum, and it really has no function, and we'll talk about the appendix later. The colon's divided into ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid colons, and the rectum. So water is absorbed from the large intestine as it moves through the colon. By the time it gets to the rectum, it's a formed mass where it's held with the contraction of the internal and external sphincters. The mass accumulates, distension of the rectal wall occurs, and the urge to defecate is created. So the relaxation of the external anal sphincter expels the feces, through the anus. If there's any portion of your small or large intestine that's removed, then that absorptive function is diminished, and that's when we'll get into talking about ostomies at the very last. Your esophagus begins at the base of the pharynx or back of the throat and ends at the opening of the stomach. These wave-like contractions, again, peristalsis, propels food from the pharynx into the stomach. So just be sure you know those terms. There's a list of terms, and you just need to know what they mean. The cardiac sphincter, again, here's your slide that shows you exactly where it's at. It's the opening between the esophagus and the stomach. It's also called the lower esophageal sphincter. Okay? The stomach itself is located on the left side of the abdomen. Some lay people think it's right in the middle of your belly, but it's located on the left side of your abdomen. It temporarily holds your digested food and prepares it for mechanical and chemical action to pass into the small intestine. Did you know that your stomach can expand to a very large size? Sometimes it's so full it pushes onto the diaphragm. That's why when you eat a large meal, you feel kind of out of breath. The lower esophageal sphincter or cardiac sphincter is the opening between the esophagus and the stomach. And I'm repeating this for a reason, okay? The pyloric sphincter. Now you'll see it on this slide where the pyloric sphincter is. It holds the food in the stomach, allows passage into the small intestines. So both keep the stomach contents enclosed, okay? Your small intestine can be up to 23 feet long, okay? And I've already mentioned that it has 3 sections: your duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. And the small intestine absorbs nutrients. So if you have an ostomy here in the small intestine, it's going to interfere with absorption, and the stool is going to be quite liquid. So we have a question. What are the organs of the upper GI system? Select all that apply. Is it the mouth, the stomach, the duodenum, the esophagus, or all the above? So what do you think? It's all the above, okay? Because all of those are organs of the upper GI system. Large intestine, 5 feet long. Diameter is about 2 inches, so it's much shorter and wider. Receives waste from the small intestine and propels waste towards the anus. Your large intestine absorbs water, electrolytes, vitamin K, and bile salts. See the cecum on this slide? There's an arrow. The cecum is a pouch-like structure at the beginning of the large intestine. Okay? And the colon is divided into the, again, ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid colons. Just another photograph that I wanted to emphasize, where if you see the ileum, the small intestine dumps into the ileum through the ileocecal valve, okay? And then you see where your cecum is. It's that pouch-like structure at the end of the large intestine. Just to get a visual of the anatomy. Peritoneum, or peritoneum, some people call it, is a membrane that lines the inner abdomen. It encloses the viscera and serous fluid. It allows those abdominal organs to move about without creating a lot of friction. So any perforation, say you have a bowel perf, or you've had a stab wound, the abdominal cavity, then any perforation allows that material to seep out into the digestive tract. It's very serious. It can lead to inflammation of the surrounding tissue and result in peritonitis. And you need to kind of visualize that, a puncture in this area, allowing that fluid to seep out, causing inflammation, because peritonitis can be very, very serious, and we'll talk about that later. Your liver and gallbladder. Liver liver is the largest glandular organ in the body. It's located in the right upper abdomen, under the diaphragm. Sometimes you can palpate it if the client is laying down. You might can palpate the tip of it. It's involved in many complex metabolic activities. Okay, so your liver forms and releases bile, processes vitamins, proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, stores glycogen, contributes to blood coagulation, metabolizes and biotransforms chemicals and drugs. That's where we metabolize all these chemicals and drugs. Bacteria and foreign matter. It forms antibodies and immunizing substances. Okay, so the liver does a lot, but it forms and releases bile is a big deal. The gallbladder is attached to the undersurface of the liver. If you can tell, in my slide it's green. But the role of the gallbladder is important in the digestion of food. It holds the bile produced in the liver until it's needed, and it helps digest those fatty foods. That's why if you eat a lot of fatty foods, sometimes your gallbladder will, you have a eruption of the gallbladder. Now, your pancreas can serve as an exocrine and an endocrine gland. As an exocrine gland, it releases secretions into a duct. As an exocrine organ, it produces various proteins, fat, and carbohydrates, digesting enzymes. As endocrine, it releases substances directly into the bloodstream. As an endocrine organ, it produces hormones, insulin, and glycagon, excuse me. Your GI assessment. Remember when you did GI assessments and you looked at their history? What was their chief complaint? What's their diet like? What's their elimination patterns like? What's your bowel movements like? What do they look like? Is it normal? How often do you go? Do you have abdominal pain? Any nausea, vomiting? Constipation? Do you have diarrhea? How about periods of incontinence? What medications are you on? Do you have pain when your bowels move? Any issues like that? Any problems with chewing or swallowing? Any history of digestive disorders? Colon or rectal cancer? Any allergies to foods? How long has this problem been going on, and any signs and symptoms that have been present? Anything that triggers this abdominal pain or diarrhea? Anything that helps the symptom go away? Patterns of elimination. What is your what do you ingest during the day? What's your discomfort like? What's your pain level? Any weight gain or loss? Past medical or surgical disorders or interventions? And any food supplements. So the interview down there is usually I interview a faculty member, and I ask them all these questions, and we make it kind of fun because they give me a hard time. Okay, so you want to look at the general appearance of the person that's coming in with a GI, complaint. What's their weight, their overall weight versus their height? What's the hygiene like? What's their energy level? Are they just dragging? What's their breathing? Do they seem to be a little bit stressed? Their mental status. Is their skin jaundice? That could be an indication of a liver issue. What's the skin on their face look like? Do they have those spider angiomas? That's their blood vessels that assume spider patterns, or distended abdominal vessels. Now when they come in with an abdominal problem or complaint, you're definitely going to want to look at their abdomen. Okay, so these distended abdominal vessels are called caput medusa. Do they have scars? Do they have drains, a wound? What's their skin turgor like? What's their mouth or oral cavity like? That's part of their digestive systems. Do they have any cracks, or splits in their gums, or their around their mouth? What's the teeth like? Do they have dentures? Is their mucosa wet or dry? Hard palate? Any problems with that, or their gums? Listen to the abdomen. First you look. Remember, first you look, then you listen, and then you palpate. So any distension or dyspnea due to this distension, listen to each quadrant for 3 to 5 minutes. If there's bowel sounds are absent, they should normally hear something about every 20 seconds. But if they're not, are they normal, hyperactive, hypoactive? You might want to measure their abdomen if it seems to be distended. Measure it at the umbilicus and mark that point, because you may have to measure that every day. What's their anus look like? That's part of a GI assessment. Did y'all know that? Do they have hemorrhoids, skin tags, fissures? You know what a fissure is. Rashes, inflammation, drainage, stool. What's the stool characteristics like? All this is on page 763. Just a slide that shows really yellow skin and yellow